Universal said, okay, we want to do the sequels.
You've got to come back with me.
Will you guys do a sequel?
Where? Back to the future.
And we said, well, if Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd will sign on for a sequel, yes, we'll do a sequel. Because if we have Marty and Doc, we can figure a story out. If we don't have those guys, there's no movie. So we went to them and they said, if you guys are doing it, we're in, sign us up.
Flying DeLorean?
What the hell is going on here?
Once we saw the response to the movie, it was kind of a foregone conclusion that it was going to happen. That made sense to me. I mean, I got that. At the time, and now it's so normal for people to lay out franchises, and before they even see the light of day, they know they got a franchise. And I remember having conversations with Bob about what it would be about. And so, it's something I look forward to.
So we said, let's see who from the first movie will come back and do the sequel. So we contacted Leah, and she said, if you guys are doing it, yes, I'll do it. We contacted Tom Wilson. He said, if you guys are doing it, yes, I want to do it. We contacted Crispin Glover's representative, and it was a little different with Crispin. Crispin decided that he should get things that were way out of line for an actor of Crispin's stature to be asking for at this point in his career. So I said to the agent, go back to your client, call me in 2 weeks, and let's talk something more reasonable. So 2 weeks goes by, and she calls me back, and she says, I'm sorry, he doesn't want to budge from that. I said, okay, thank him very much, and we'll just write George McFly out of the sequel.
I just want to know one thing. Where's my father? Where's George McFly?
We said, okay, if we have Lorraine and we have Biff, but we don't have George, George has to be dead.
No! Oh, please, God, no!
And that is the reason that George McFly is a tombstone in part 2.
How about a ride, mister?
Jennifer. Oh, you a sight for sore eyes.
I was supposed to do both sequels, and my mom got ill. In fact, there's like websites dedicated to whatever happened to Claudia Wells and why didn't she, reprise Jennifer Parker. But I left the business at that point. There was so much going on in my family, and I backed out of everything.
When you do a sequel, there, are obviously characters that you're going to bring back, hopefully, but sometimes they're not available, sometimes they don't look the same, sometimes they're not acting anymore, and that's another challenge, Do you just hope that nobody will notice, which is kind of the case with Marty's girlfriend? We just thought, well, she's not available, she's not working anymore, and we'll make it work.
Well, what are you talking about? What happens to us in the future?
What, do we become assholes or something?
Oh, no. You and Jennifer both turn out fine. It's your kids, Marty. Something's got to be done about your kids.
We had no choice, so we had to try and find somebody. I mean, we found, Elizabeth Shue, who came on for Claudia on the second one. I mean, she's a wonderful actress. So, I thought that was fairly seamless as far as that goes. The George thing was a little bit trickier, and it was more about figuring out how we could do this. It's one of the reasons he's upside down. We thought people wouldn't be able to tell as easily if he's upside down.
How did he do that?
Oh, out on the golf course.
Bob and Bob came to me one day and they said, we want to design a device we're calling the OrthoLev, which we will have McFly hanging upside down, and it needs to travel through the house. He can be able to go from room to room to room, and he's going to always be on this and be upside down through the whole deal. So we had to put track, we had to hang track in all the sets and be able to hang someone upside down and travel them along in shots through the house, so that was kind of a fun deal.
I actually wrote a draft of Back to the Future 2 where the third act of it was not going back into the first movie, but going back into the 1960s, where Lorraine is a flower child and she's protesting the war in Vietnam, and Marty gets thrown in jail. There was a whole thing to that, and Bob read that draft. He was making Roger Rabbit, and he said, well, this is okay, but we can do something that nobody's ever done before. We can actually, with a time machine, go back into the first movie and look at it from a different point of view. Wouldn't that be cool? I said, yeah, that would be cool. And then Bob said, it would be really great is if we went into the Old West after that.
1885! September 1885!
Well, when Bob and Bob sat down and they laid out this whole sequel, and it was too long.
Bob and Bob handed me the sequel script. You know, it was like 185 pages or something like that. And of course they said, we have to make cuts in it, but read it anyway. Because they always liked me to read, the result of all of their mad science. But this was a very complicated plot, and it existed not only in the future, but in an alternate present that we've affectionately called Biff Horrific. And then it went into the Old West. And it just seemed like two movies.
Two movies that Bob and I loved when we got out of film school in the 70s were Richard Lester's Three Musketeers and Four Musketeers. We thought that was really cool, that they shot those two movies back to back at the same time.
And then now you look at Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and everybody sort of looks at these ideas as franchises today.
We said that's what we should do. We just keep shooting. Let's just keep shooting. And thankfully, we had the best crew that you could ever imagine. We were 11 months of shooting those two movies, and everybody was still on speaking terms at the end.
I thought that it was actually going to be a great decision because we would be able to keep a lot of consistency as far as the look and the crew and the equipment and so forth. You know, it was going to be a lot easier.
Yeah, that's good. Put a half double in the bottom. This is what I'm going to need about week 6. Can we go a cup of coffee?
This is great, Bob Z. Thank you very much. And it turned out to be a really interesting time because I got married. Now my son was born. My father passed away. All these big, huge, kind of seismic shifts in my life happened while I was doing those two movies. But rather than be a distraction or be a burden at that time, they existed as kind of a continuity for me.
I don't know how to tell you this, but you're in a time machine.
And this is the year 2015?
I've never liked future stories. I've never liked alien stories because they're just the opinion of the filmmaker. I don't know, it's like just stuff that writers just can make up. So it really isn't really, in my opinion, very interesting for me to watch. So the future stuff of the Back to the Future sequel was the least interesting thing for me to do in the entire making of the three movies.
Well, you're the Doc.
Here's our exit.
We did certain amounts of homework where we said, okay, this makes sense as to where it's going to be and where it's going to go. A lot of stuff we knew we were going to get wrong.
But it turns out that our future predictions, we were about 50% right. So we got 50% right and we got 50% wrong. It's not bad.
We knew really that we weren't going to have flying cars, but my God, we had to have those.
The flying DeLorean was an all fiberglass shell with retractable wheels, and so that was completely fabricated in my shop and from molds and fiberglass.
Right on the tick.
The second, and as it turned out, third movie, they were a lot of fun to work on. Like creating that whole future world, just in terms of sets and props and effects, they were enormously bigger and more expensive movies than the first one. And I think there were maybe 27 people in the art department for number 2 and 3. And we were all thinking about crazy things for the future. I had some specific assignments, like Doc Brown is supposed to have an amphibious flying van. So I did a bunch of sketches for that. Unfortunately, it got written out. And I nursed an idea that John Bell had for this beautiful flying Citroen taxi through to completion. I made working drawings and bid it out and then worked with the shop to get it done. I was a resource available for anyone who wanted some crazy thing designed and drawn.
He'll be right over here, and then just as he's turning around from that, we'll have this hologram of Jaws come out and try to bite him.
It made me feel like I wasn't given a movie assignment, but I was given an experience to actually go on those journeys to those places. And because there was something already that was very strong about Hill Valley as presented in the first movie, I could build upon that as a production designer, and then with all the input that Bob and Bob could give me, to actually feel free to project myself into the future.
The future.
in the era of Blade Runner and Brazil and all of that, to project ourselves from the 80s to a place where there was a balance with nature and the park and the pond, and then all these sort of free-form architectural styles that I could bring to bear into the square, I found that I was able to kind of see it as an optimistic look forward into a world that I hoped would be.
In Back to the Future 2 on the square, both Bob and Bob paid tribute to all kinds of things, both in their personal past and to filmmakers, giving a nod to filmmakers. In one such case, they had this hologram for Jaws in 3D, you know, coming out of the movie theater.
Shark still looks fake.
On another one, if you look on the scoreboard, because Bob's from Chicago, there's a huge proclamation up there that says Cubs win World Series.
Against Miami?
Yeah, it's something, huh? Who would have thought? 100 to 1 shot.
I remember when I saw the film, one of the things I said was, well, you know that poster in the alley that says Surf Vietnam? That's never going to happen. And now here we are, and I was wrong. I mean, these guys are almost prescient, some of the things that they came up with.
This thing doesn't fit.
Size adjusting. Fit.
The story was that you would get clothing and it would fit itself to you. So I came up with the idea that it was rubber and that it had these whole sections which would draw themselves into your body size. And the drying thing, I think, was Bob's idea, that it would sort of be one-stop, do-everything item of clothing.
Your jacket is now dry.
The thing that was great about working with Joanna Johnson, the costume designer, was that we were really very new to the game, both of us. And Joanna brought so much to the table in terms of her imagination of types of materials that would be not really practical right now, but maybe they could become things in the future and worn, like the idea of the two ties, where we came up with shoes that buckle themselves up.
Power laces, all right.
The only thing that I wish had happened was Marty McFly's shoes that lace by themselves. That was the one invention that I was really hoping would happen in the next 2 or 3 years after the movie came out that hasn't happened yet.
How do you play this thing?
I'll show you, kid.
You may spot in the Back to the Future movies Billy Zane and Elijah Wood, who are some of the background characters
Sonny, we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
that Bob Z has been able to put into the film with some very astute casting in his early career.
Little girl, stop. Look, I need to borrow your hoverboard.
I believe Bob Gale was the first one to approach me over hoverboarding, and he steered me to Cornell University, where they were experimenting with maglev technology for trains. And I called them and got someone on the phone and asked how it worked and all that. And so we started playing around to see if we could have magnets actually hold something up. We also had plenty of hidden cables and wires, Flying Michael and Michael's double, Charlie, all over the place. So pretty much everywhere we went where you see them flying and in the air, they were hanging from piano wire.
There's something very familiar about all this.
Yeah, well, someday I think the hoverboards, will certainly be a reality someday.
Buttheads.
No, I'm sorry, I missed that whole thing. Doing part 2 was really flying by the seat of our pants, and one of the things being the sequence where I played 1985 Marty, I played my son, I played myself older.
What the hell is this?
I played my daughter.
Mom? Mom, is that you?
And the technology that they were using was state-of-the-art at the time. Now it's really outdated, but the genius behind it is really, speaks again to Bob and Stephen and their genius.
Starting on Back to the Future 1, Bob Zemeckis formed a relationship with Ken Ralston, who's really one of the premier wizards in visual effects. But when we came to Back to the Future 2, by then Bob was kind of breaking the walls down and decided to really blow it out.
While we were working in London on Roger Rabbit, I said to Ken, so here's what we're gonna need to do on Back to the Future 2. We're gonna need to come up with a way to put actors in the same shot, duplicating them as 3 people. And I said, so what are we gonna need? And he said, well, we're gonna need to build a very serious motion control camera. And I said, well, we should get started on it like now.
No, you just gotta have the right touch. Nobody can start this car but me.
Yeah, the bill comes to $302.
$300?
And the ILM guys developed a Tondro motion control system, and it was fabulous. It worked exactly the way we wanted it to.
Aren't you and Jennifer getting along?
Oh, yeah, great, Mama. We're like a couple of teenagers, you know?
One of my fondest memories of that sequence is that there were all the experts were sitting around trying to figure out how to do something, and Bob would let them think for a while, and then Bob Zemeckis would go, "No, okay, this is how you have to do it." He was so smart, so ahead of everybody that he would always figure it out.
But in those days, everything was still being done optically, so nothing in the set could be disturbed between takes. And as a matter of fact, everything was glued down. Everything on the walls, every bit of set dressing, anything that wasn't being moved had to be hot glued down with a hot glue gun. Unfortunately, the one night where we locked up the stage and put guards around it so that nothing could be disturbed, and of course, as fate would have it, we had an earthquake that night. Luckily, it was a small earthquake, so we shot splits that we were owed and put the film together, and we couldn't see anything. So the earthquake really didn't bother anything.
Okay! Oh, right, you keep running, sucker! And you tell that realty company that I ain't selling, you hear? We ain't gonna be terrorized!
Well, the template for a dark, second act in a trilogy was set by George Lucas when he made the first 3 Star Wars. And Empire Strikes Back is clearly the darker of the 3 films, and for me, the best of the first 3 Star Wars episode, 4, 5, and 6. And so, yeah, the second act was the dark act, but you have to go into a kind of abyss before you can climb out and become a hero in the spotlight.
You can't be. Drop it.
So you're the son of a bitch who's been stealing my newspapers.
Mr. Strickland!
Doing the second one was my favorite because it was so insane.
Oh!
Marty McFly! Marty McFly! Don't you know me, sir, from school, sir?
I've never seen you before in my life, but you looked at me like a slacker.
And Strickland is suddenly in this house with armor and a shotgun, and there's kids harassing him, driving by. It's just madness.
Hey, Strickland!
And cut. So on action, you're both looking out there. You, Jim, are gonna just dive in the house.
On action, will I turn this way, do you think?
Yeah, drop.
At that time, I was filming Back to the Future at night and Dick Tracy during the day, simultaneously. So it was interesting, a challenge.
Action! Window! Ah! Action, Michael! Ah! 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 James!
Ah! Eat lead, slackers!
Cut!
I love movies.
Okay, we'll play back A again. That was good, Michael. Good effect.
Boy, you're right about you don't act that. You just go.
Okay, good. Next
All right.
setup.
Well, you don't want to be like, have all that stuff go off and you screw it up. You know what I mean? Like you forget, you do something wrong and they got to do it all again. So.
And I love the way number 2 became so dark. Greed and evil took over. And then in the third one, the whole sky opens up. It's a Western, there's romance, and everything gets resolved. And it just had this curve that was wonderful to play and wonderful to do.
It's like we're in hell or something. No, it's Hill Valley, although I can't imagine hell being much worse.
One of the fun aspects of 2 was the fact that we were visiting 1985, and Biff had changed the rules. And so we were able to give it a different look, a darker, more affected, sinister time period.
We used to call that Biff horrific. And what I thought about it as is this is a place, especially Biff's apartment, where you just wouldn't want to find your mother.
Michael.
Just relax, Marty. You've been asleep for almost 2 hours.
Horrible nightmare. It's terrible.
You're safe and sound now. Back on the good old 27th floor.
27th floor?
Everything's gonna be fine, Marty. Are you hungry? I can call room service.
I didn't really realize what a great part I had in Back to the Future 2 till I saw it. I'm dazzled by my work in that movie, honestly, because that character that I created with the big bazoombas, I was basically playing a drag queen. Honestly, I was. And, you know, I did a lot of work on that character, and it's very sad and upsetting, that scene.
You're supposed to be in Switzerland, you little son of a bitch!
I love that. That's one of my favorite scenes I've ever done in a movie.
What the hell do you care? We can afford it.
The least we can do with all that money is to make a better life for our children.
Oh, Marty's your kid, not mine. And all the money in the world wouldn't do jack shit for that lazy bum.
Stop it, Biff. Just stop it.
The makeup was extraordinary because these days you have greater facility to do makeup and to age people and to present them in different ways in movies. And in those days, you know, you had to tip your hat to the guys who did it in the old-fashioned way, just with subtle prosthetics to make these changes work.
They're doing little touch-ups on us before we do this shot. They're always with these pieces. The glue is very strong, but sometimes at these little flaps here, it'll come loose right around here. So they come up and annoy you quite a bit with this little printing and fussing.
Tom was nuts. He's funnier than hell. You couldn't ask for somebody nicer to be in a tough situation with. And we spent more hours together than husband and wife. Because there were such a variety of looks on him, and we switched back and forth all the time.
Magicians, makeup magicians. Thanks, you guys.
It takes an hour, and it looks like a horror movie to take the makeup off.
They worked hard, and it was a long process. And Tom Wilson, he made Biff so real and so powerful that I think that took him by surprise. And that's just the power of film, and it's the power of creating a character.
What are you looking at, butthead? I'm just kidding. I'm a very nice person. They make me do this. If I'm not mean, the checks don't clear, and that's bad.
The thing about Tom, too, is that Tom is just such a gentle giant. He's such a sweet guy. You know, sometimes when you work with guys and you have physical scenes, you have fight scenes or pushing scenes or whatever, it can be a little iffy because if an actor just needs to do it and be aggressive and be violent, control sometimes is wanting and you can get hurt. But so he was always really measured and really knew what he was doing and all that. But then at the same time, he had a real intensity.
2 McFlys with the same gun.
It's funny, just I sit here talking about it, I just had this kind of sense memory flashback to when we shot a lot of that stuff on the roof of the hotel and falling off and rising up in the DeLorean and all that stuff like it was yesterday. Just I share that, it just came back to me.
Nice shot, Doc. You're not gonna believe this. We gotta go back to 1955.
I don't believe it.
I think the second Back to the Future, it might be the most interesting movie I ever made. It was a once-in-a-lifetime situation that no other filmmaker has ever had before. Because here I had a situation where I was doing a sequel to a time travel movie where a character goes back and visits the original movie. So you have a chance to make the first movie again from another point of view. And it was really something that thrilled me to do it.
Because in the first one I did this.
Did you? You're sure?
Yeah.
All right, well then, the first one in the first movie? Or the first take?
Going back into a movie and looking at it from a different point of view actually presents challenges that you can't even imagine, because you have to go back and recreate a setting and revisit it, but see it from another side. You might see like a dance sequence from backstage instead of front of the stage.
This must be the dance. It was strange, and it was like a time warp to go back to the same sets and the same costumes. And they actually didn't have my pink dress. They couldn't find them. They made 3 of them for the first one, and I had taken one. And someone had already sold off, I think, the other 2. So they were going to have to remake it, and I said, I have it, and I had it, and I got to wear it.
And I had some brilliant people who did some investigating, and we did find a lot. And if we didn't find the actual, we either copied or we got things which were very, very close.
It had only been 5 years, but when I hit my knees on the knee slide 5 years later, it's 29 instead of 24. My legs are like, no, we don't do that anymore. You know, that's enough of that. So it was a little humbling moment, you know.
You don't want to gonna get struck by lightning!
That's the problem with sequels. The audiences have opinions. They want the same movie but different. So what you have to do is you have to say, okay, how do you make the same movie that is different but not too different? The same but not too much the same. And it's really, really a difficult thing to do. And for a filmmaker, it's not really a fulfilling thing to do. I mean, because you're constantly on that balance beam, and you're slave to these opinions and these things that we have to do.
It's me, it's Marty.
Oh, it can't be. Just sent you back to the future.
Yeah. Oh, I know you did send me back to the future, but I'm back. I'm back from the future.
Movies should be experimental.
Great Scott.
Especially reinforced and emboldened by the massive success of the first Back to the Future. The guys took some tremendous risks, but you can't get up in the morning if you're a director like Bob Zemeckis without doing something which is seemingly on the surface brash and unpopular. I mean, Bob has to push that envelope.
We finished shooting Back to the Future 2, and then we all went up to Sonora, California to Back to the Future 3. And Back to the Future 2 had a release date, so we had to get the cut right. We had to get Bob in again in the evening, and that was very difficult because he was shooting another movie.
Bob would finish shooting Back to the Future 3. He'd get on a private plane. They'd fly him down to the Burbank airport. Bob would come in, we'd sit down, he'd have dinner. I'd play back for him the sound mix that I'd supervised during the day. Bob would give his notes, he would make changes. We'd work for a couple hours with the sound crew, getting it right. Bob would go to the Sheraton Universal, he'd go to sleep, he'd wake up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. Car would take him to Burbank Airport, he'd go back and shoot, and he did that for about 2 weeks. So it was insane.
Well, I think there's, it could be dangerous to leave the audience with an unsatisfying end in the second movie. But what was great is we were shooting the third movie and we could cut a trailer to attach to the end of the second movie to say, hey, wait a minute, don't get upset. There's going to be a third movie that's going to wrap everything up.